of the Tooniverse. Thank you for tuning in to our second episode of Who Is. My name is Toonsies, your podcast host, and joining me here today is Cheesefish and Timer.
I am Cheesefish. I am a game designer and a game developer here at Corporate Clash. I also do writing, and I am the guy that's responsible for implementing the Ottoman, also the Chief Operating Officer, into April Toons every year.
Hi, I'm Timer. I am a moderation lead assistant and also a lore writer. I don't do much things on the technical side, but I'm in charge of a lot of the fancy life details that goes into writing the Ottoman.
Thanks for joining us, both of you. And for those who are first-time listeners and haven't heard our last episode of Who Is a podcast series that dives deep into the lore of all your favorite characters from Toontown Corporate Clash. Here we'll discuss backstory, other lore elements, and some development background and other fun facts you may have not known before. Furthermore, in the end, we'll answer questions that you may have from our Twitter that you may have saw earlier. So, from our last video, a good amount of our community has asked us to cover the beloved Rambler, the Chief Operating Officer, otherwise known as Ottoman, otherwise known as Thomas Saggs. So, and a lot of people are wondering, who is this guy? Why do we come and visit him every April Toons? What's more about him? And generally just his general backstory. First most is, I would say, his personality that a lot of people know him to be. The Rambler, and with all the like. Timer, you want to kind of talk about that, of just his personality and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that go into Ottoman's personality as a whole, but if you just had to like condense it down into a couple of words, I would probably just say that he's very laid back and chill and not very he's not much of a go-getter. He just kind of follows people around. But he's a different personality whenever you compare him to like other types of Cogs, especially because he is obviously a lot more kind to Toons and things like that. And he's obviously a lot less aggressive, and he has a huge fixation on gardening as a hobby, which is something that we haven't really seen before, considering our Cogs are typically very discriminatory of nature. They don't like it very much, but he loves gardening. He's got a whole bunch of plants. He's got Bubby, who we all know and love, and he's very passive. Despite being the oldest brother, he's actually more passive as compared to Robert, his younger brother, actually. So you would expect him to take on more of a leading role being the older one, but he's quite the opposite.
Yeah. And I actually want to go back there. You mentioned his younger brother, the chairman, which other people know as Robert. Can you talk about, like, why we decided to give Robert a brother who is obviously the Ottoman?
Well, the reason we gave Robert Thomas as a brother is because it helps to humanize him, ground him as a villain. Because when you have something that you can relate to, it helps to kind of bridge that gap that is kind of missing, where you have this big bad that everybody sees as a final goal, but instead you can kind of see it more on your own level.
Yeah. And obviously with these two being brothers, obviously you see some kind of connections or something between them kind of going on. What's the relationship between them?
You see it a lot in video games. You have Mario and Luigi. More recently, you have Sans and Papyrus. It happens a lot where you see this dynamic of an older brother and a younger brother, and it's almost like an unbreakable bond that they come as a 2-for-1 package. We designed the Ottoman Thomas as more of the Luigi of the partners, where he's kind of in the background, not really as prominent, but for whatever reason he becomes a fan favorite because of that scarcity of presence in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And obviously with relationships, you just got you all know is that he has a brother, and then you have Bubby. And, very people little know about, like, Bubby's, relationship with, Thomas. Want to go a little detail about that as well?
I'm going to be completely honest about Bubby. Bubby was a completely last minute addition because I thought that the room was too gray and square. So I put in one plant to make the lobby area not as boring.
Yeah, and I know, from watching that we've kind of decided to play along with that, and then that kind of grew more into a, kind of his gardening fixation of that, like. And
It became a running joke,
Yeah.
because with Bubby, I don't think we had a name for Bubby for the longest time, but we started running out of dialogue to fill in the 20 minutes back in 2020. So, in that regard, we just had to start coming up with stuff about what the plant in the lobby was called, give some backstory to that almost as like a meta joke.
and obviously that grew into more of his personality, and then came what he is now that people know and love. I've seen this actually, kind of going off tangent here. I've seen this question being thrown around a lot lately of, where has Ottoman come from? Where has these two brothers come from? What got him into the position of, Cogs Incorporated?
So that one goes back quite a bit into sort of Ottoman's backstory, which is that he and Robert initially worked for their parents, their parents' company. And being the older brother, Thomas was initially supposed to take over his parents' company. He was the designated heir. And their relationship with their parents wasn't really like the greatest. There were a lot of expectations placed on Thomas, and like I mentioned before, he's a very passive personality, so seeing him in a leaderly position just isn't, it's not like him. And being told or being designated as the one to be in that leaderly position was just it wasn't something that he enjoyed. It wasn't something that he saw for himself. He did it begrudgingly because I'm sure many of you can relate to the feeling of feeling obligated to your parents. But he at the end of the day, he didn't really. It caused him a lot of dread because it's not the life that he saw nor wanted for himself. On the other hand, they with his in regards to like his relationship with Robert specifically, they were not like the nicest to Robert, just because he was the younger brother. And so a lot of it was like, why can't you be more like Thomas? And so naturally Robert struck out on his own. And Thomas immediately saw this as a position like, okay, well, if he can leave, then I can leave, right? Like, he's done it first. So this gives me an opportunity to follow him. And he still loves his parents. He's still like cares a lot for them, and I think he probably still feels bad about leaving them to this day. But following Robert and joining and creating Cogs with him was just like the most freeing experience ever. And he would, at the end of the day, he would follow his brother to the ends of the earth because that was one of the best decisions that he's ever made, probably. And that's how he ended up as the chief operating officer of Cogs, is that he left with his brother. He abandoned his entire life. He left his entire life behind, essentially, just so that he could make this random startup company with his brother.
So could you say in a way that Thomas kind of looked more up to his brother rather than like vice versa, obviously? Because obviously you got Thomas, who was the designated heir, did not want that, and felt like Robert was more in the position to do so.
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of ironic in the sense that, like, you know, Robert is the smaller one, and he also like stands on top of Thomas and things like that. But somehow Thomas still looks up to him. So he's very like, he's not very strong-willed. So he basically just follows his brother around and does whatever his brother wants him to do or tells him to do. But he looks up to him a lot, is just like a role model, and just for having more initiative. So he sees in his brother what he probably wants to be himself. but is also just perfectly happy the way he is. So he's not like trying to make any changes like to overthrow his brother or anything like that. He's just like he's happy to just follow him around.
Oh, I really do enjoy that. And obviously, with him getting into Cogs Incorporated, you obviously got more people coming in. Do you know like any other relations with the other employees at Cogs? Anyone specific or no?
So he tends to sort of like keep to himself. He's very quiet in public spaces, and he only really speaks whenever he's spoken to, or whenever someone like tries to make conversation with him or shows up to his office. So I want to say that he's probably like the kind of like a ghost around the facility in the sense that he doesn't have like a lot of relationships with the other employees just because he doesn't really he sticks to himself and he doesn't really talk to them. Um, but he is. I do know that he has some like bordering relationship with the people who are around Chairman quite a lot. So Chairman's wife, for example, is someone else that he has a relationship with, and he doesn't like her.
And of course, with him being Cogs Incorporated a lot, and it sounds like that with him being isolated to himself, he's probably got a lot of work on his hands. So you know what kind of stuff that he does specifically, or?
So he is the chief operating officer, which is sort of like if we break it down into real life terms, the chief operating officer is sort of like the chairman's second hand man. They do a little bit of everything. They stick their fingers into every pie. Whether or not they're necessarily supposed to is another story, but that's usually what they end up doing. So he does a lot of like paperwork and glue work that sort of holds the company together. So chairman is obviously a busy man, but typically whenever there's like more menial tasks or like talking to the CEO, CJ, CFO, things like that that he doesn't really want to handle, then those responsibilities fall on the COO to send out memos and things like that and sort of like file any paperwork that needs to be filed. So he's like up to his neck in paperwork because he does all the paperwork that Robert doesn't want to do.
CJ then, now CLO.
Yeah, thank you for your correction. It was probably the CJ whenever he was still around, but now it's the CLO, so.
I know there's actually one thing I've been meaning one to ask, and obviously this kind of comes off. What was the inspiration for his appearance in April Toons?
Well, 2020 had come along, and SkyClan was not a very successful April Tunes back in 2019 with Mayday and whatnot. So when 2020 came along, we were in the middle of Break the Law Phase 2. We had Red Airwing, and we also had not much else really going on at the time. So we decided to have Thomas show up in Board Bots HQ. I know a lot of people think that it's Board Bot, but it's Board Bots, which plays into the fact that it's just him alone sitting at a desk. That was supposed to be a riff on the idea of us adding in a new boss specifically for April Tunes. The reason that we did that was because we wanted to have an easy way to introduce lore that didn't involve us having to make these grand events that you're literally just standing in an elevator for 20 minutes while he talks at you. It's supposed to be like this subversion of expectations where you're expecting this big fight, seeing this big elevator, everything going on, but you just have one dude sitting at his desk while 8 people sit there talking about playing 52 card pickup.
Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of things too that came along with it. I know we've been adding, instead of like lore hints, we've also been adding like radio hints, right?
Yeah, the radio actually served as a great way for us to introduce new music before you actually hear it in game. You've seen this with things like Radio 21, which showed up as the Cellbot building Grace theme that plays after you finish a floor. And you've also seen it for some tracks that I don't know if this is going to be allowed, but some tracks are going to be upcoming, obviously, because that's what it's there for.
And I'm sure it must be a real big surprise of how much like positive opinion that this has come from, especially just with this lore and all this kind of sneak peeks of future content that's supposed to come out.
It's not originally what the intended purpose of him showing up every year in his office is, but we've kind of retooled it into that, and it makes a great way to act as a teaser for upcoming content without directly telling you what the content is. It helps the community speculate.
Of course. Alright, I feel like it's now to kind of shift over to our segment, over to the Q&A. And surprisingly enough, within the topic of the radio and of the like, we have a question here from Darth Crimson Fox, and all of these questions are from our Twitter posts that we usually send out, kind of, more before we start doing the podcast and all that kind of stuff. This question here, what is Ottoman's favorite type of music?
So his favorite genre of music, it's a little bit all over the place because he tends to just sort of listen to what's ever on the radio. But I will say that he does, like, in terms of, like, his absolute favorite or what he likes to listen to the most is he prefers jazz.
Really?
Do not bring up you like jazz jokes, but that is in fact his favorite type of music.
Oh no. Oh. Alright, our next question here is from Snowstar Leopard 1. Can he talk to plants like Toons who completed the plant puzzle? Does he enjoy their leafy puns?
I mean, I don't think that he necessarily has, like, magical plant talking powers, but he can understand, like, their needs. He can't, like, really hear them, like, telepathically in his head or something like that, but, like, he knows enough about plants to, like, know what they need, like more water, more sunlight, things like that. So he doesn't like have he probably has conversations with his plants, but it's kind of like talking to himself, not really expecting them to talk back.
Man, that's cute. That's really nice too, with him kind of, again, with that fixation. He just knows everything, and obviously he has some kind of understanding in gardening. We have another question from Colo Flame. Whenever we visit him every April Toons, why does he casually let us relax in his office, expose some high-class information, and gives us gifts when we leave, since that is something no Cog would do to Toons?
Well, I wouldn't say that he's exposing high-class information. He's just kind of divulging into family drama. He might say a few things about what's happening in the company, but by then the Toon Resistance has already got that intel. Like how he talked about the death of Atticus, or how he talks about the litigation team and the insurance companies that shut down because of it. But as for why he lets you just sit around, I guess he just likes the company. He's very much somebody that's behind the scenes, and he knows that his office is so cluttered that there's no way for you to actually fight him there. Nor would you really have a reason to fight him, because I guess the Toons see it as a way to get some information about the chairman and his family dealings, because that's stuff that's not really divulged by the chairman or any of his department leads that are around him. Having that information, I guess, kind of helps you build a psychological profile on your enemy. But as for him, he's just kind of, talking about family drama because he's venting. He does paperwork all day. I imagine he's probably pent up. As for the gifts, why does he give out clothing items every year? There is a pretty good reason for that. The first year when he gave out the t-shirts, that was because that was what the chairman was going to give out as a reward, assuming that you defeat him in battle. And he even mentions this, that he thought these shirts were going to go to waste because the chairman assumes that he always wins. So every year they come up with something else to give out as a reward, but it's just wasted funds from the company, really. Though the more recent years, I guess, the Ottoman felt Thomas felt an obligation to give these out just because of the first year.
Would you say it's more an obligation, or could you, say that this is more of, is he trying to create a bond here, or is it just, again, trying to, I gotta meet up the standards?
There's no bond here. He doesn't really like Toons, per se. He just kind of tolerates them being there. It gives him something to vent towards, which I mean, he'd be venting towards plants otherwise. Having somebody that's actually listening, that's kind of nice.
And on the topic of plants, we have 2 questions here, both from C. Warmonk. First one that they have is, are all his plants the same type?
Yes. They are olive fern, known as Ficus elastica.
And I know he's mentioned this before in previous dialogue too, so he's got an abundance, especially within his office. The second question that they have in our last question here is, how does he feel about his job?
I feel like he's content with his job. He doesn't have a reason to hate it. And it's something that he absolutely would feel comfortable doing. He doesn't have to interact with people all the time. And he gets to do paperwork behind the scenes. He's not on the front lines dealing with company affairs. He just gets to do all the management stuff that's necessary to run the company.
And it seems like that's our last question. Cheesefish, Timer, thank you so much for joining. And to all of you listeners out there, let us know what character should be talked about next. And we'll see you in the next episode of Who Is?